Fantastic. Right. I think that's enough time now. So I think everybody that needs to join us has joined us. Thank you all for attending today. The webinar today is how to look after your mental health amidst COVID-19 fears. And we're going to hear from Dr. Emee Vida Estacio today, and she's going to talk us through the webinar. Just a couple of bits if you've not used Zoom before, and for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we cannot see you and we cannot hear you. So do not worry if you're not feeling up to people seeing you today. We cannot see you or hear you. If you would like to ask any questions, at the bottom bar there is a chat function, and there is also a Q&A, which Emee will go through shortly with you. But for now, I'm going to pass you on to Emee, who's going to start her presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Can I share my screen,
You can.
Laura? Okay, let me just share my screen here, and I'm gonna make it full screen if I can just view full screen. Can you see that? I cannot see the chat box. Sorry, can I stop share again just to make sure that I could see the chat? Oops, hang on. The beauty of technology. Okay, so let me just share my screen again. Share screen. I'm sorry, Laura, I cannot see the chat box. Oh yeah, hang on. There it is. There. I had to press the 3 dots on the side of the share screen. So awesome. So hi everyone. Thank you for having me today. To those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Emee Estacio. I'm a chartered psychologist and founder of the PAMI Code, and I'm the best-selling author of Fear is Not My Enemy. Now, I've been invited today by the Chambers to talk about how you can look after your mental health amidst COVID-19 fears. Understandably, there's a lot of fear in the air right now. You know, COVID-19 is just sweeping through the nation and around the world, and it has affected our day-to-day lives and our interactions with everybody essentially. But just to give me a bit of context on who's here right now, could you please type in the chat box who you are and where you're from, so I can get a sense of who I'm talking to, and so I could tailor the discussion as well based on who is attending this webinar. So hello Paula, hi, how are you doing? So to those of you who haven't seen the chat box yet, okay, so here it's all coming in now. So there was a slight delay. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, Fiona. Hi, Claire. Hi, Gemma. Hi, Declan. So a lot of people from the Chambers of Commerce. David, hi, David. How are you doing? Anne, hi, Anne. Wow, nice to see you. Gavin. We do have some mental health first aiders as well. People from Synectics. Felicity, hi. How are you doing? So excellent. So we do have a wide range of people on here. HR support, banking, uh, let's see who else is in here. Income training, PR. Fantastic, excellent. Thank you all very much for coming in today, and I hope that you will find this session useful, because yeah, I've, as a psychologist, I've sensed a lot of fear from the things that I see on social media, and my conversations with people around me. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, and for me as a psychologist, there are certain things that I know, strategies that I've learned from psychology that I can share with you today. So if you are experiencing fear and anxiety right now, you would be able to use some of these strategies and hopefully help others as well. If you are supporting staff or family or friends who are experiencing a lot of anxiety and fear right now, then this is the place to be, to share all of the techniques and strategies from psychology. So just to give you a general overview, my aim really for today is to help you to look after your mental health and how you can support yourself and others amidst the COVID-19 fears. And the way we're going to structure the webinar today is, first of all, we'll try to cover some of the psychological mechanisms of fear. Why do we experience fear, and what happens in your brain when you actually get triggered by fear, and how you respond to fear. Because as you will see later, there are some automatic responses that we have as humans in response to fear. But ultimately, it is your thinking brain, it is your prefrontal cortex that will determine your response to fear. So we will explore some of the psychological mechanisms of fear. We'll also try to identify some of your triggers, because once you identify your triggers, then you will be in a better position to um, to modify your thoughts, so you can also modify your behavior in response to these triggers. Then the most important bit, I'm going to share with you some strategies that will help you to cope with fear and anxiety. Particularly, I will share with you the TLC technique, that will help you to frame some of the thoughts inside your head, and how you can make your thoughts and attitudes towards the trigger more constructive. So instead of being paralyzed with fear, you can actually confront your circumstance more constructively and more effectively. In the end, I will offer you some avenues where you can find some more support. And then, if we have time, we will also have a session for questions and answers. So hope that's okay. So if you're ready, let's begin. So, what I've noticed these days is, yes, there's a lot of fear and anxiety going around right now around COVID-19. There are people who are worried about getting sick, because if they get sick, they can't look after their family. A lot of people are concerned about their loved ones, especially if you have elderly relatives, or if you have people who you love who are particularly vulnerable, and you are worried that they might not survive in this current time. As business owners, I can see a lot of anxiety around the economy and the risk of the business not surviving, because of the uncertainty and all of the isolation that we're experiencing right now. A lot of fear that you might lose your business, that we are heading towards dark times. And there are people who tend to see it in a more catastrophic ways, in such that we are all doomed, and all these fears are just bubbling up in your head. Now, can I just say that all of these fears, you may be experiencing all of these fears, but it is absolutely perfectly human to experience fear. If you are experiencing fear right now, it's not necessarily a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are human. It's perfectly human to experience fear. Without fear, we will not survive as a species. It is hardwired in our evolution, in our brain. It is part of our human experience to feel fear. And ultimately, fear is an experience. It's an emotion caused by the belief that someone or something dangerous is likely to cause pain or is a threat. So it is your brain's response telling you that, look, there is a potential threat here. You have to pause and take caution and do something about it. So we need to experience fear, because if we didn't experience fear, we might be putting ourselves in unnecessary risk, or we might put other people in unnecessary risk because we couldn't perceive the danger. So there are some studies where where there's some brain damage in some people, and they couldn't experience fear. What happens is, yeah, they take unnecessary risks. They don't take precautions because they don't experience fear. So if you are feeling fear right now, don't be too hard on yourself. It is not a sign of weakness. It is just a sign that you are human, and that there is a potential threat, and that your brain is telling you, look, there is a potential threat, there is a potential risk. You have to be careful and take some precautions. So before we get on into the psychobiological mechanisms of fear, let's talk a little bit about our universal fears. Because now that we have COVID-19, it's actually tapping into all of our universal fears. That's why the fear is so strong right now. And as you can see here, our universal fears are as follows. We have the universal fear of extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death. These universal fears manifest in everyone. They might appear in different ways in different contexts, but all these different kinds of fears can be can have all these underlying universal fears. So let's take them one by one. So the first one is this fear of extinction, and essentially this is the fear of death. And now that we have COVID-19, this is actually one of the more prominent fears that we are experiencing right now. You know, the fear of us getting sick and ultimately getting killed as a result of the virus. So it's part of our universal fear. You know, the fear of extinction is right up there in terms of the emotions that we might be feeling right now. The fear of mutilation is another universal fear, where you have this fear of losing a bodily function or essentially getting sick, you know. So again, with COVID-19, with the virus out there, we are worried that we might lose our good health and that we might not be able to function as we please. Also, the fear of loss of autonomy, that we cannot control anything, that this is out of our control. Some might be feeling trapped and helpless, and worrying about the future. You know, all the uncertainty, it's all there, you know, being triggered right now. And in terms of the loss of autonomy, because of the uncertainty of the future, there's a lot of fear around what can I do if something hits my family, or if it hits my business. I might not be able to do anything about it. So there's a lot of fear around that as well. Fear of separation is another universal fear. It is the fear of isolation. Now that we are isolating, we are in lockdown right now. People are feeling the fear of losing connection with others. And at worst cases, it's the fear of losing a loved one, you know, the death of a loved one. The fear of separation is at the core of this fear, and this is what a lot of people might be experiencing right now. And the last one here, we have the fear of ego death. This is the fear of not necessarily the physical death, but the fear of your losing your self-worth, your self-esteem. So for business owners, for example, there is this fear of humiliation, and the fear of failure if the business does not survive, that you will lose face as a result of this. So again, there's that underlying fear based on our universal fears. And what's interesting with the COVID-19 right now is that it's tapping into these all basic universal fears from all areas, you know, the fear of extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death. It's coming at us all at once. That's why there's a lot of fear in the air right now. So, if any of you can relate to that, you know, do share with me what's on your mind. If any of those universal fears make sense to you, or if there's anything in particular that's worrying you right now, please feel free to share them in the chat right now, so we can actually explore some of these fears today as we talk about some of the strategies on how to manage fear, just to give it a bit of context, and we can talk about it in more detail as we go through the webinar today. So we have here Kylie. She's scared of losing a loved one, especially your grandparents, as they are in their 80s, self-isolating and not able to see them. Yes, absolutely. As we've seen earlier, it's one of the universal fears that we experience as humans. You know, this fear of losing a loved one, the fear of separation, and death is the ultimate separation that we are afraid of right now. The Samantha says feeling a loss of control is huge for me, and certainly for a lot of people. You know, came to us so quickly, the loss of control over how we can prevent ourselves from getting unwell, and the loss of control as well, in terms of the economy for the business owners or even for the staff. All these uncertainty, it's all bubbling up, and we feel the fear because we are human, and your brain is telling you that the risk is actually there. Joe is saying here that I am seeing this with colleagues as people are being furloughed, loss of self-worth. Absolutely. It's the fear of ego death, the fear of losing the fear of humiliation, the fear of failure. It's a huge, huge emotion for humans to have this feeling. Gemma is also saying here, the biggest one for me is fear of losing family, who are all in the vulnerable category. And Kate is saying, I am avoiding reading about what's happening in hospitals, as the stories about what it's like being on a ventilator is terrifying. Again, yeah, that's actually tapping into your universal fear of extinction and the universal fear of mutilation, losing the function of your body, both for me and the thought of it happening to a loved one. So as you can see here, we are actually sharing the same universal fears. And so if you are feeling this way, um, know that you are not the only one, and it is not a sign of weakness. It is just a sign that you are a human being who experiences these emotions as well. Donna is saying, I have OCD, so my fear is not being able to have my medicine and my OCD getting worse during these times. Again, that's the fear of loss of autonomy, loss of control, and how we will cope with the length of this, a length of time of this, and stay patient and calm. So don't worry, John. We'll cover some of the strategies later, but it's good that we are able to share some of our fears, just to remind ourselves that, yeah, we are not the only one who feels this way, and it's perfectly human to experience this fear. So if I can just share with you how we respond to fear. Some of you, especially for those who have a background in psychology, you may have heard of Lazarus and Folkman's fight or flight response, the fight or flee response, that when we are confronted with a threat, we either fight it, we confront it, or we run away from it. But there's actually an update on the fight or flight response. There are some people who might end up freezing. They get paralyzed with fear, and they just, they are paralyzed with inaction because of the fear response, or they end up flopping and not doing something, but not necessarily know what's going on because of the panic caused by the fear. So however we respond to fear, that will actually depend on how you are perceiving the fear. And when we talk about that, I'll have to talk about the psychobiology of fear. Let me put my psychology lecturer hat on for a minute here. I used to be a lecturer, a psychology lecturer from Kiel. So let me give you a little bit of background about that. Um, because when you understand how you are processing triggers, and how you respond to fear, could give you more a better sense of control on how you manage your thoughts and how you respond to the fear. Okay, so when it comes to a trigger, so maybe something triggered you to feel fear, the immediate response that you'll get from your brain will come from your limbic system, and this is your primitive brain. For us, this is essential to our survival. Back in the days when we were cave people, you have a saber-toothed tiger, for example. You have to respond quickly, right? So it is your primitive brain, it is your limbic system that responds immediately. So that's why some people get startled, they get palpitations. Some people end up fainting, because of the adrenaline. They couldn't handle the rush of adrenaline when they are confronted by a fearful stimulus. So you have a trigger, the limbic system, your primitive brain responds, and your body responds immediately. But as we evolved, we eventually also developed our prefrontal cortex, and that's the thinking part of your brain. And now, after your primitive brain responded, your thinking brain will eventually catch up. It's slower, the primitive brain actually responds more quickly. You have a knee-jerk response when you are confronted by a fearful stimulus, but eventually your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex will catch up, and that's when you begin to assess what is the risk? How am I going to confront this risk? What are my ability? What skills do I have? What's my previous knowledge about this risk? Can I manage this risk? And what are the consequences of my response? So your thinking brain will eventually catch up and make you assess the risk, the nature of the risk, your ability to manage the risk, and the consequences of your action. And however you interpret this information will ultimately decide how you are going to respond to this threat. So, if I can just give you an example, this is an illustration that I have from my book, Fear is Not My Enemy. Let's say, for example, you are in your living room, right? And suddenly a mouse comes in, and you first get startled, you didn't expect it. That's the limbic system responding. You get startled, you get palpitations, you have tunnel vision, just really focusing on the potential threat. That's the limbic system responding. And as you can see here, the prefrontal cortex is trying to think about, okay, what is my previous experience of this mouse? What is this? Is this a threat? Is it going to harm me? How can I confront this threat? And so on. So what's going on here is the limbic system, because it's quicker, it's the primitive brain, it responds first, but eventually your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, catches up. And if your thinking brain interprets the threat as, okay, it's just a little mouse, it's not going to hurt me, I'll just shoo it away and I'll be fine, then you will behave accordingly. But on the other hand, if your prefrontal cortex, if your thinking brain interprets the mouse as something vicious that's going to attack you and it's going to eat you alive, and you have to run for your life, then that's how you're going to respond. So the key message here really is that your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, ultimately decides your behavior. It's going to inform how you are going to respond to the threat. So you have a powerful mind. How you interpret, how you perceive the threat will ultimately determine how you respond to the threat. So you need to be mindful of how your thinking brain is processing the information. You need to be mindful of your thoughts and your attitudes, and how you are going to plan your response. How are you going to behave in response to this threat? Because your thoughts ultimately will inform how you're going to behave and how you're going to respond to this threat. So that's really the key message here. For me as a psychologist, I always tell my clients, be mindful of your thoughts. When you understand your thoughts and when you know how to control your thoughts, then you will have more control of your behavior, because how you interpret something, your thoughts will ultimately define your behavior. It will define your response to whatever trigger or whatever threat that might confront you in your life. So whether it is something fearful or any other trigger in your life, always remember you have a powerful mind, and your thoughts will define your behavior. Your thoughts will define your response. So make sure that you know how to control your thoughts and how to manage them effectively. So are there any questions before I move on? Are there any thoughts before I move on to the next bit? Because the next bit will be the strategies now. Understanding that you have a powerful mind, that it's actually your thoughts that will define your behavior. That's where we're going to base our next steps, because it's all about managing your thoughts so you can manage your response. So let's just have a look if there are any comments in the chat box. Please feel free to comment here. There might be a bit of a lag, but I'll just wait for a little bit if you have any thoughts about that. No comments? Okay, that's fine. Let's just get on with the strategy, shall we? So I'm going to share with you 3 strategies on how you can cope with fear. So the first strategy that I'm sharing with you today is all about compassionate self-talk. And when I talk about compassionate self-talk, it's all about recognizing that you may be feeling fearful. It's all about acknowledging the emotion, recognizing that it's a basic human experience to feel this way. When you find yourself experiencing fear, talk to yourself as if you are talking to a frightened child. You're not going to shout at it. You're not going to be angry at it. Just acknowledge that this feeling exists and acknowledge that this is a natural human emotion. So the first step really is to acknowledge the emotion, and the second is explore the underlying beliefs. We've talked about earlier that it is really your thoughts that will determine your response. It's your thoughts that will determine your behavior. So you need to explore what are the underlying beliefs, what are your thoughts about what's going on, so you can actually make an informed decision on what you need to do next. And when you are exploring the underlying beliefs, the strategy that I use myself, because I experience fear myself, I have elderly relatives myself, I have a business too, and there's a lot of fear going on right now. So I do experience fear myself, but I'm learning how to cope by acknowledging this emotion, by exploring the underlying beliefs. I'm not burying it, I'm not denying it, but I'm trying to explore it and giving myself a bit of compassion as I explore this. And the way that I do this is through the TLC technique. You can see here in my slide, I say here, give yourself a bit of TLC. And when I talk about TLC, and for those of you who have heard me talk about this before, I talk about imposter syndrome sometimes, and I talk about self-doubt. It's the same thing with fear. The TLC technique is a questioning strategy that I use with myself and with my clients to explore the underlying beliefs that you might have about yourself or the circumstance around you. And this encourages you to ask 3 questions. You ask, is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? And when you apply the TLC questioning sequence, it gives you the permission to explore your thoughts. It gives you the permission to actually do a reality check just to make sure that the thoughts that you are holding are real, because sometimes the thoughts that we might have are lies. So most of the time they are irrational thoughts. They might be exaggerated thoughts, and they might be destructive. You might be holding on to these thoughts simply because that's what's going on in your head. But if you ask, is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? It gives you the permission to check if it is real, if there is evidence that it is real, if it is logical, and if it is something that's benefiting you or others around you. So if we just apply it in the context of our COVID-19 fears, there are people who have this fear that we will all die. So it gets the fear is actually magnified in that way. That universal fear of extinction. It's an underlying fear that we all experience, and it is magnified in the context right now. So when you're thinking this, we will all die, when you apply the TLC technique, first you have to ask, is it true? Is it true that we will all die? And the answer to that is no, because if you actually look at the evidence, you can see that yes, there are increasing cases, and sadly, the death toll is also rising right now. But you can also see that there are people who are also recovering. We can see that the majority of people who get COVID-19 will have mild to moderate symptoms, and it's really those who have underlying health problems, or when it is confounded by the age and your vulnerability, that increases the mortality rate. But this thought that we will all die, if you ask the first question, is it true, that would actually make you stop, to pause, look at the reality, look at the data. And that particular thought, as we all know, is not true, because we can see that there are people, a lot of people are recovering, and that not everyone who gets COVID-19, it's not necessarily a death sentence once you have that. So even just the first question in the TLC questioning sequence, is it true? It actually stops there, because you know that this particular thought is not necessarily true. Now, there's another thought that we could explore right now. You might be thinking, I might get sick, and if I get sick, then I would not be able to look after my family. So if you apply again the TLC questioning sequence, you might ask, is it true? Yes, it is true that you might get sick. And if you do get sick, it is logical that you might find it difficult to look after your family. But with the second question, the L, is it logical? Just because you get sick, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get well. And also the C question, is it constructive? When you are thinking that you might get sick, instead of burying yourself in fear and in worry, acknowledge that there is a potential risk. As we've said earlier, fear is not our enemy, because the fear, your brain is telling you that there is a potential risk, and you have to take the necessary precautions to minimize your exposure to this risk, right? That's why you feel the fear. Your brain is trying to protect you and telling you, look, you have to be careful, there is a threat, I have to scare you off a little bit, right? So that's why you're feeling fear. And if you're having this thought that you might get sick, the first question, is it true? Yes, it is true that you might get sick, but to make it more constructive, you have to reframe it. Okay, I might get sick. What can I do to minimize the risk of me getting sick? So that's why when I talk about, exploring your thoughts, some self-help gurus might ask, just fight it, just bury it, you can do this, you just have to fight those thoughts. I would say, you don't have to fight your thoughts. I've mentioned earlier, you need to practice compassionate self-talk, acknowledge the emotion, acknowledge the thoughts. But when you use the TLC questioning sequence, you explore the thoughts. You ask, is it true? Is it logical? And the third question here is it constructive? The thought of I might get sick, the risk is there. What can I do to minimize the risk? Look for guidance, look for information to minimize your risk of getting sick. So now we have the guidance. Wash your hands, stay at home, practice social distancing, and stay well. So this is what I'm trying to say. When you feel fear, the fear is there because your brain is telling you that there is a potential risk. But ask, is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? And if it is untrue, get rid of that thought if it is untrue. But if it is true and it is logical, just find a way to make it constructive, instead of you getting paralyzed from this thought, being paralyzed by fear. One of the responses is to freeze or to flop. Make it constructive and look for ways to protect yourself, to minimize the risk. So you might feel more protected knowing that you've done whatever it takes to minimize the risk. All right. So that's the second thought. The third one here, and this is probably more appropriate for the business owners in this webinar. Some of you might be worried about your business. that your business might not survive, after this crisis. And if you apply the TLC questioning sequence, you might ask, is it true? Is it true that my business will not survive? The answer to that, it is possible. It's you shouldn't really deny if this thought actually crossed your mind. Don't go into denial that it's all going to be okay, and we will be just fine. The thought crossed your mind. It is possible. And with some of the difficulties that we might experience in the economy, it's logical that your business might find itself in challenging circumstances. But the third question in the TLC questioning sequence is it constructive? Again, when you have this thought that my business will not survive, you might have that fear, you might have that thought, it might have crossed your mind. But as a third question, is it constructive? How is this thought helping you or others around you? Since you have that thought and your brain is telling you, look, there is a threat, there is a risk, what are you going to do about it, right? So instead of telling yourself there's nothing I can do about it, instead of just fleeing, again, that's another fear response. Some people run away from it, some people freeze, some people flop, they just do, and they actually have no strategy whatsoever. In your case, you can actually control your thoughts, and you can choose to actually, okay, the answer is fight, but I wouldn't ask you to fight. What I would ask you to do is strategize. Look for ways on how you can minimize the risk. You recognize that there is a risk. What can you do about it? Who do you need to talk to give you support? If there are things that you need to, for example, if you need to adjust your business, if you need to pivot a little bit, and if you don't have the skills or abilities to pivot, who can you reach out to for support? Who can help you to make those adjustments? So this is what I'm saying. If you're having these thoughts, if you're having this fear, because it's being triggered by all sorts of thoughts, whether it's fear for your business, whether it's fear for your health, fear for your family, ask the questions. Is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? Because first of all, if it is untrue, if it is not true, then why are you holding on to it, right? But if it is true and if it is logical, the third question is it constructive? Make sure that your thoughts are benefiting you or others around you instead of destroying. And in terms of choosing your response, whether you want to fight, flee, freeze, or flop, that's entirely up to you. And as far as this thought, my business will not survive, there is a risk. We understand that there are threats and risks right now, but what you can do is you need to be constructive about it. Look for strategies, look for ways to minimize your risk, and reach out for support if you need it. If there are certain skills or knowledge that you might be lacking, to pivot and adjust to the current circumstance, reach out. And that's why I'm actually grateful that this is being organized by the chambers of commerce, because we know that they are there to support us if we need them, especially in these very difficult times. So, so that's what I have to say about the first coping strategy. If anyone would like to comment about that, if you found the TLC questioning sequence helpful, please feel free to put them in the chat box. For me and most of my clients, what I found was most of the time the underlying thoughts that we have, they tend to be untrue, they tend to be unrealistic. So most of the time, the first question, is it true? That's usually enough to stop the thought, because once you know that what you are thinking is a lie, it stops there. But on the other hand, if the thought is true, if it is true that there is a risk, if it is true that if you don't do anything, then the risk will get bigger, then the third question, is it constructive? That's when you have to look for ways to minimize the risk. Don't go into denial that everything is going to be okay. That's not constructive at all. That's why I always ask myself and my clients these three questions, because we want to be sure that we are grounded in reality, that we are not paralyzed by the fear, but we are not also up there in the clouds and being unrealistic. If there is a threat, acknowledge the threat, but at the same time think about constructive ways on how you can minimize the threat and what you can do to protect yourselves, your business, your family, and so on. All right. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy that I would like to share with you today is identifying your triggers and your response to these triggers. So for me as a psychologist, especially my background is I'm a behavioral psychologist as well. So we're all about identifying what's triggering us, the external triggers that we might have. So for example, you might be getting triggered by what you see on the news or what you see on the social media. Maybe you're watching the rise in cases, or the death toll and so on. Those could be your triggers at the moment. So you need to identify those particular triggers that's causing you fear right now. So you need to be aware of what's causing you fear right now. After you've identified your triggers, you need to learn how to manage your exposure to these triggers. So what I've noticed with some of my clients is that they would say, in the past I would only look at the news once a day, just watch the news for 30 minutes, and now and then it's done. But these days they find themselves stuck on the news for 2 or 3 hours and just being overwhelmed by what they see. Or when they go on social media, they are feeling overwhelmed by the amount of scaremongering in social media, and they know that it's triggering them, but they cannot help themselves from looking at the news or on social media. So what I would say to you is, if you've identified your triggers, if you're being triggered by the news, if you're being triggered by what you see on social media, it is your decision. You have control over your behavior. You can control your exposure to these triggers. So you don't have to watch the news 24/7. You might just need to watch it 10 minutes in the morning, and maybe have an update again 10 minutes at night, just to keep updated. But you don't need to be notified every time there's breaking news, or you don't have to keep watching your phone just because your phone is in your hand. So remember, when you've identified your triggers, understand that you have control. You can decide your exposure to these triggers. Just be mindful that you can manage your exposure to these triggers as well. And finally, the last bit that I want to share with you here is, yes, you are being triggered. Maybe you still need to be exposed to these triggers from time to time. You still need to check the news from time to time and check on social media from time to time. You cannot be absolutely not exposed to your triggers. But the next thing that you need to understand is that you can also manage your response. So what I've noticed with some of my clients is that they would say, yes, I get triggered by the news. And yes, I have to read the news. I have to stay updated. But every time that I do, I have panic attacks. I'm just paralyzed with fear. Now that you are aware that this is how you respond, this is what happens to you when you are exposed to your trigger, be mindful of how you are responding. So if you are watching the news and you notice that your limbic system is responding through palpitations, and maybe you're hyperventilating, or you're just getting so stressed out with fear, what I would ask you to do is to take 5 deep cleansing breaths. Just be mindful of how your body is responding. Remember, as we've said earlier, in the psychobiology of fear, you get triggered, the immediate primitive response that we have goes to your limbic system, and your body responds in the certain way. You feel your body tightens up, you feel your heartbeat, you feel panicked. So it's a very physiological, it's a strong body response, because that's how we've been hardwired in our brain. So what I would ask you to do, if you are mindful, if you are aware that this is how your body responds, what I would ask you is to close your eyes and just take 5 deep cleansing breaths. Just inhale relaxation and exhale the tension, and just be mindful of how that's affecting your body. Just step away from your trigger and just practice, yes, 5 deep cleansing breaths. Notice how that affects your body, how that cleanses your body, and you'd be amazed at how simply breathing, consciously breathing and being mindful of how you're responding to the trigger could calm you down. So this is the second strategy that I would ask you to do. Identify your triggers, manage your exposure to your triggers. Remember that you can decide, you can control the amount of time that you expose yourself to your triggers, but at the same time, manage your response as well. Be mindful of how your body is responding. And when you are mindful of how you are reacting, you can control that as well. Just take 5 deep cleansing breaths. Inhale deeply and exhale the tension. And you will feel, be mindful of how that's melting away the fear, or at least calming you down. If you need more deep cleansing breaths, if you need 5 minutes or 10 minutes just to calm yourself down, do that. And I know that there are also some meditation guides available on YouTube, or some apps that might help you to meditate, to just calm your mind. I would encourage you, if you are experiencing panic attacks, or if you are feeling really stressed out by what you are seeing, that if you cannot manage your exposure to these triggers that well, practice a little bit of meditation. Practice a little bit of, just calming yourself down, and being able to manage your response, being mindful. But yeah, it all starts with identifying what's triggering you, acknowledging that you can control your exposure to these triggers, and also managing how you respond, how your body responds. And just be mindful of how that's impacting you and your well-being. All right. So, yeah, so that's the second strategy. I hope that was helpful as well. I mean, certainly for me, because my family is actually in the Philippines, so I keep watching the news with what's going on there. My parents are over there. I do get stressed out as well, but I have to keep an eye on the news. I have to keep myself updated, and whenever I feel that I'm getting really panicked, that I'm feeling the fear, I just practice, I step away from my trigger, because I've identified that as my trigger. I step away from my trigger, and then I take 5 deep cleansing breaths. You'll be amazed at how that can actually help you. It's really quite simple, but it's really, really very helpful, right? So that's the second strategy. The last one, before we finish the session today, the last one that I would like to impart with you today is really be supportive of each other. We might be in social isolation right now. We are staying at home, but that doesn't mean that we cannot get in touch with other people. Certainly for me, as I've said, my family's in the Philippines, my in-laws are in Greece. It's just me and my husband here. We still stay connected. We reach out to family, friends, colleagues who might be experiencing the same fears that you might have. So if you are better able to manage your mental health, do reach out and support others who might need that support as well. And in the same way that you've practiced compassionate self-talk, you also need to practice the same compassion with others who might be experiencing fear as well. The main message that I said, right from the get-go, is that experiencing fear is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that we are human. So, just acknowledge the emotion. If someone is experiencing fear, be there for them without judgment, be there for them with compassion, acknowledge that they are feeling this way, and then explore the underlying beliefs. Try to examine where these fears are coming from. What are the underlying thoughts that's making them worried and fearful right now? And in the same way, you can also use the TLC questioning sequence to help you explore these underlying beliefs, these thoughts, so you can see whether it is true, whether it is logical, and whether it is constructive. It's a really good way to explore the thoughts. It gives you the permission to actually acknowledge that you are feeling this way, you're feeling vulnerable, and if someone is feeling the same way, you are acknowledging those emotions. You are acknowledging that you are human. You are acknowledging that there are thoughts going on inside your head. But when you experience when you use the TLC questioning sequence, it gives you the permission to explore their thoughts, to explore those emotions, and ask, is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? And that would give you a better understanding of whether those thoughts are unreal, illogical, or destructive. All right. So I hope that was helpful. If you, the thing that I would say before I leave today is stay connected, reach out to friends and family if you are feeling fear. Make sure that you still talk to people. Stay connected. Anxiety UK is also opening up their helplines if you are feeling really stressed out right now, feeling very fearful. I know that Age UK is also very busy right now, but the alternative could be the Silver Line. They have a free phone number if you have elderly friends and family who may be feeling vulnerable right now. They can call that hotline for free. And in terms of your business fears, your business worries, reach out to the chambers of commerce, reach out to your colleagues, to your peers. Get those thoughts out and use the TLC questioning sequence. We are all in this together. And yes, the threat is there, the risk is there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do anything about it. That doesn't mean that you cannot minimize the risk. And that's why if you use the TLC questioning sequence, you ask, is it true? Is it logical? Is it constructive? Because that way you acknowledge the risk and you actually do something about it instead of freezing, instead of flopping around, or instead of running away from it, you actually do something constructive about it. So I hope that was helpful. That's all from me for today. If you want to learn more, I actually do have my book available on Amazon called Fear is Not My Enemy. It's available on print, Kindle, or audiobook version. So if you want to listen to my voice, I hope my voice is not too irritating for you. But Fear is Not My Enemy. I talk about the psychobiology of fear in there as well, and all the other strategies that we have in applied psychology to help you to understand your triggers, to help you understand how you process your fear. I know that I talked about COVID-19 right now, but in that book, I talk about, the fear of failure, the fear of uncertainty. I even talked about this fear of leaving an abusive relationship and so on. So all sorts of fears that we experience. And I hope that you found this webinar helpful. Practice TLC, reach out to others and practice TLC with them as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now so we can go through a bit of Q&A. I think we have, I'm sorry, I took up so much time. We have 5 minutes left for Q&A. So Laura, can you show your face, please?
Hello.
Yeah, so do I press Q&A here?
Yeah, so everybody, thank you for all attending today, guys. If you have got any questions for Emee, you'll see that the Q&A is either at the bottom of your screen or at the top. So if you could pop your questions in there for Emee, and then she'll be able to answer them for you.
I think there are some people putting in the chat box instead, so I can answer from there. It's absolutely fine. So Kate is asking, do you have any advice for people who are sleeping badly, waking up in the night where the triggers may gone unrecognized earlier in the day? Yes, absolutely, Kate. for me, what I experienced that myself from time to time. I wake up in the middle of the night feeling fearful, but it's really, if you do wake up, do the breathing exercise, mindfulness exercise. But what I would also encourage you to do is to try to avoid your triggers um an hour before you sleep. So make sure that you actually prepare yourself and your mind before going to sleep. Maybe you could practice the meditation before going to sleep, so you can actually have a more peaceful, restful night's sleep, and not get waken up in the middle of the night. But certainly this is not uncommon, especially in this really stressful times, that people are waking up in the middle of the night. When that happens, practice deep breathing exercises, meditation, to calm yourself down.
Brilliant. Emmy, you've got 2 questions in the Q&A. Do you want
Oh,
me to...
cool. Okay, let's have a look. So, Jody, hi, Jody. What advice would you give to people who are working from home and trying to balance homeschooling along with full-time home working? I actually have that thing going on right now as well. My son is 5 years old, and for me, it's a matter of, first of all, having a dedicated workspace, so you have the space for work, and you have the space for learning. Maybe you have the space for family time. If you have limited space at home, you can get creative, that for this amount of time, this is the workspace, and for this amount of time, it is the learning space. But it's all about organizing the workspace, and also organizing the time, blocking your time specifically. So if I can give you an example how I'm coping right now, I would wake up at 6 in the morning because my son wakes up at 8. So I have 6 till 8 working on my business, right? So that's dedicated, concentrated time to work on my business. I have my office here, so it's all quiet. As soon as my son wakes up at 8, it's homeschooling time, right? So we play, we do what we have to do to catch up with the learning. If I have appointments, if I have to see clients during the day, then I will have to ask my husband to help out, and watch my son for a while. If you are a single parent, that might be difficult. But we have storytelling time, for example, on YouTube, that you can put up for half an hour or an hour, educational videos that you can put up, if you have clients, or if you are working on those specific times. And then again, I work at night, because some of my clients are in the States. But for me, really, it's making sure that you have dedicated working space for work, dedicated space for learning, so it doesn't get all messy, and blocking the time, having the specific time for work, having the specific time for learning, so your mind doesn't get overwhelmed with you have to do 1,000 things all at the same time. One thing at a time. This time is for learning, this time is for work. That's how it works for me. But I hope you can, if you think that that could work for you, then you can adapt that as well. So we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Any advice on supporting children with worries around COVID-19? Absolutely. When it comes to supporting children who have worries about COVID-19, you can apply the TLC questioning sequence as well. Or maybe you can use children's stories, for example. You can be creative. You can use puppets, you can use dolls. So it's not a non-threatening way to explain things. But again, just acknowledge the fear, acknowledge the beliefs, the thoughts that's going on in your child's head. Approach it with compassion, just as we've talked about today. The compassionate self-talk, and the way to support others is to recognize the fear, recognize that it's normal to feel fear, explore the thoughts that's going on there, and then you can use the TLC questioning sequence. For children, you can be creative. You can use stories, you can use toys, you can even find some videos on YouTube to make it more simpler and easier to understand for children. But yeah, just approach it with compassion, and approach it with a bit of TLC. That way we can support each other, and that we acknowledge that this is a natural human emotion, and that we just need to support each other in this way. Any other questions? Do we have in the comments? Donna says, thank you for the, you're welcome. I hope you found that helpful. Jody, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome, Jody. Yeah, I hope you found that helpful. And Samantha, thank you. That was really useful. Stay safe, and I hope your family also stay well. Same to you, to Samantha, and then I hope to everyone listening right now. Stay well, and keep it constructive. The third question: is it constructive if you are worried? If you acknowledge that there is the risk, minimize the risk. Stay at home. Stay well. Wash your hands.
Well, fantastic, Emmy. I don't think there's any more questions that we're going to get. Everybody that stayed on to the end, thank you very much for joining us for the webinar today. Just to remind you that the Twitter hour on the Chamber's website, so hashtag Staff's Chamber Chat is on every day from 11 to 12, and we will be running webinars every day at 2 p.m. and bar Mondays. So we look forward to seeing you all for some more webinars tomorrow.
Take care. Bye. 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 Bye, everyone. Bye.